So this is showing how the US government and countries that follow ICNIRP have among the highest levels. They allow the highest levels of radio frequency radiation from cell towers compared to many other countries worldwide. So you have India, which, by the way, used to have even much more stringent levels with 4G, but now with 5G, they have loosened their limits because of industry pressure. Croatia, Israel, Italy, which unfortunately Italy and Belgium also, regions in Belgium, also loosened their previously very strict limits because of industry pressure, yet they are still stricter than the United States. China and Russia have much more stringent limits. Why? Because they have had active research programs since the Cold War, before that, actually, working on this issue related to military use as well as therapeutic uses, and they have set more stringent limits. Now, importantly, their limits do not necessarily mean safety because there have been effects found at levels even lower than the limits of these countries that have more stringent limits. Yet, what this really reflects is how the US government is not leading the way in safety. We do not have researchers looking at this issue in the US government in any robust way, at least that I know of at this time, though there may be some movement on that coming up. There was this moment in understanding this issue when I learned about how the limits were set that changed everything for me. So here we have a little mouse. The way our limits were set were based on small mice, rats, small monkeys that were exposed to wireless radiation, microwaves, for a very short amount of time, under an hour. They had been previously trained to press a lever for food. They were exposed in under an hour, and the level at which they stopped pressing the lever for food, that is the level at which the engineers who were doing the research decided that's bad. Like something's going on. This is a behavioral impact. We know it's harming them. They had the temperature measured of the animals, and that overheating level is considered the level of adverse effect that our limits are based on.
I first want to go into the basis for the exposures that limits that have been established by the ICNIRP and the FCC. These go back to studies that were conducted in monkeys by the Navy, US Navy Department in the 1980s. And what the studies were based on were rats and monkeys that were trained to push a lever to obtain food. And after they were trained, they were exposed to radio frequency radiation at different frequencies and power levels. And what was reported was that at approximately a specific absorption rate, this is a measure of the internal absorption of the energy, that at that level of 4 watts per kilogram and higher, the response rates were decreased. This occurred in rats and in monkeys as well. And with monkeys, in addition, there was a 1 degree rise in their body temperature. So a few things about this. One is the number of animals that were studied in these particular groups was very small. There were 8 rats and 5 monkeys. And this is the basis for the exposure limits that are being used throughout the world. The studies were 40-minute or 60-minute durations. These are acute exposures. They don't tell you anything about long-term exposure. And they're only a single endpoint, this behavioral response to pressing a lever. This does not meet any reasonable standard for characterizing the potential of a hazardous agent.
That is how our limits were set. They are not set looking at biological effects that are non-heating related, long-term exposure or from cumulative sources or looking at children's vulnerability or what the impacts might be to wildlife, they were set based on these small animal studies, and arbitrary safety factors were used to drop that level down, and that's how our US limits were set. It is unacceptable and indefensible. Now, our limits were set in 1996. In the year 2000, T-Mobile commissioned a report. The Ecolog Institute did it. It recommended an exposure level based on the science at that time, 1,000 times lower than FCC's current power density limit. 1,000 times lower. So when you hear that a cell tower is just 1% of the limit, well, the Ecolog Institute recommended 1,000 times lower. And now we have so much more science and research to support the knowledge that there are non-heating effects, because our limits are only based on overheating effects. I know some of you are coming here from other countries, so you're dealing with ICNIRP limits, but in the US, we have not had a scientific review of our limits since, actually not in 1996 either, but our limits were set in 1996 and have not been updated since then.